Greetings. Welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kweskunadu. Glad to have you back for another episode. On this episode, our focus will be depression. Now, many of you, as viewers and subscribers, even newcomers, are familiar with either the clinical definition of depression or the most commonplace definition of depression. So I won't go into that because you already have some basic understanding of what I'm referring to. Now, whether it is the mood swings, the emotional imbalance, the chemical combustions that happen within our brain, within our bodies, that produces a range of feelings from extreme highs to extreme lows to somewhere along that spectrum, of feelings and moods and physical and emotional and other kinds of output. I want to move away from the sort of clinical definition of depression, sort of the manic depression or the very deep, dark place that depression can sometimes take us, and think about depression like other psychosomatic or health or healing phenomena as really the spirit of something, right? I want to think about depression as the spirit of something that is consuming us, is sort of eating us, is getting at us. Now, there's some people who deal with this thing that we're calling, for the time being, as a standing depression by eating food. And really, the question that I want you to ask yourself if you find yourself in that situation is, what's really eating at you? I don't mean your innards. I mean, what's really eating at your spirit and your soul? Now, I want to be clear once more that the spirit and the soul are not the same. Yes, they belong to the same being, the same person. But the soul is that core, undefinable, immaterial thing that is located where the physical heart is. But the soul is immaterial, right? But the soul is essentially the core thing that makes you and I who we are. Whereas the spirit, we often think is the mind, but the spirit is not the mind. The spirit is actually the other part of us that is independent, but is linked to the soul. Let me break it down this way. You ever find yourself in a situation where deep in your heart, meaning your soul, you feel something, right? Or you have a sense about what to do or not to do. And then you say, well, my mind says something different. Well, it's not your mind, because the mind is really a spirit, right? It is the immaterial part of the functions of the brain, which I talked about in previous episodes. So the brain is that physical thing, right? That physical thing that's inside of our skull. That's one thing. The mind is actually a spirit. It's an immaterial force, immaterial energy that complements the soul, right? And when the spirit and the soul are one, our decisions, our determinations, our actions are clear, are genuine, are authentic, and they usually pan out well for us in our best interests. So, what depression does as a spirit, it actually what? Brings the soul and the spirit into conflict, into tension. When that's in tension, it produces a range of feelings and emotions and moods that we often medicate in one way or another. And that's where the food comes in, of one form of medication. So I know women and men who often medicate themselves when feeling what we're calling as a standing depression by consuming all kinds of food. You name it, cookies, ice cream, chicken, fast food, so on and so forth. And they medicate. But the key question to ask yourself as you get to that point, or before you get to that point, is what's eating me? What's eating at me? What's getting at me, right? Really, essentially, what is nibbling at your soul, right? What is poking at your spirit? Because it indeed, depression is a spirit, right? That is poking, that is nibbling, that is trying to what? Cannibalize our soul, our being, our real authentic self. And that vulnerability whereby depression sets in or gets to come into contact with our soul, our being, our true self, is when what? The spirit and the soul are what? At odds, when they're in tension, right? When they're basically, you have two minds. By that I mean the soul and the spirit, they're not aligned, they're not in sync. And that produces vulnerability. That produces a crack. That produces essentially, a fissure in our firewall, right? That is whatever protection that we have around us. There's a gaping hole that is now taken advantage of by the spirit that we're referring to as depression. Now, many of us suffer from various kinds of depression because depression is not one thing. Depression is like cancer. It is a catch-all term that means a lot of different things, or different kinds of cancer. But cancer is really one thing, really. It is when the cells of the body, driven by a spirit of chaos and disorder, essentially is working against the body, right? So the body is basically cannibalizing the body. And so cancer can happen anywhere. It can happen in the pancreas, it can happen in the liver, it can happen in the brain, it can happen, in other parts of the body. And so cancer can be anywhere because cancer is not one thing. However, you can boil it down to one phenomenon, which is this chaos that's produced by vulnerabilities within our being, within our system. And so likewise, depression is really a catch-all term for really what I'm referring to in simple terms as the spirit that attacks the vulnerabilities within our body system. Much like a virus attacks our bodies, or a virus attacks a computer or attacks a device, is based on a vulnerability within that system. So our body systems are similar to those devices that are attacked by malware and viruses. Depression is a spirit. And so when this spirit comes, it can produce a momentary kind of depression. And many of us, including yours truly, have encountered this. I remember once it happened within maybe a few seconds, where I just, had my head down and just lost in this singular thought about, is it worth it? Whatever it was I was dealing with, is it worth it? Or once I remember sitting on the couch in my house, and for about 2 or 3 weeks, didn't feel like eating, didn't feel like cooking, and therefore I wasn't eating. I was ordering out, didn't feel my normal self. And I would just sit, I was crying because I was going through some things in the moment, and didn't really fully realize that this, in fact, is depression. The depression, it is one kind of spirit, but it produces different kinds of effects. So it can be momentary. It can happen in over a few seconds. It can happen over a few minutes. It can happen over a few hours. It can last weeks, months, even years. And so depression, though its origin, its spiritual origin, is one kind, right? It is a spirit. Its manifestations, can ricochet into various kinds of forms that can be temporary, momentary, or longer lasting. And many of us, in fact, all of us, go through periods and bouts of depression. Even right now, many of you watching this have gone through and will go through, and perhaps are going through kind of depression, don't realize it. And this is where depression becomes so important for us to deal with, particularly peoples of African ancestry that have had net negative experiences with the medical establishment in the United States and other parts of the world, whereby there is a informed and historical distrust between the medical establishment, doctors all the way down to the facilities that are supposed to provide health and care, and people of African ancestry being used as lab rats, as experimental tools, as essentially vectors for different kinds of diseases, as well as treatments for those diseases. We can think of many examples, including Tuskegee experiment or Henrietta Lacks, for which there's a book and other resources about her story. And so those two are simply just the icing on the proverbial cake of a long history of distrust. And so who do we turn to when we are experiencing these bouts of depression? Who do we go to? And depression can also be gendered, whereby men tend not to want to discuss or talk about, reveal that they're going through depression, right? And all of us, including children, go through bouts of depression. And so the question becomes really, what's eating at us? What's getting at us? What is that spirit of depression, antagonizing us? What's the vulnerability that's allowing that depression to cannibalize us? And for me, and perhaps for you as well, in those seconds, in those minutes, and in those 2 or 3 weeks where I wasn't eating or feel like cooking and the like, relationships, right? Many times, depression attacks the vulnerabilities that are caused or that are occasioned by our relationships, whether it's familiar relationships, spouse relationships, partnerships, friendships, companionships, any kind of relationship that we have, including ancestral relationship or relationship with immaterial forces and figures. All our relationships determine the kind and quality of our health, our stasis, right? Our balance, our equilibrium. And so for me, in those moments, it was about familiar relationships, things that were going on within my immediate family, and then sometimes my larger family, friends or people that pretended to be friends. And we have an episode on frenemies, so do check that out. And so many times, what's getting at us is the quality, it's the kind, it's the ruptures, it's the ill feelings that occasion our relationships. So, for example, you know, I have a thing about going to bed and being angry or being, having an ill feeling, towards, my fiance when we go to bed. And this is for anyone of us, is that we ought to resolve whatever we do before we go to bed, because that ill feeling will open a gap, and that gap will lead to, again, a few seconds, a few minutes, that spirit of depression to take a hold, that spirit of depression to have a gap by which to come through to attack and to cannibalize the soul, that is the core, our being. And so that's just one form of remedy to get at depression. But depression and other strategies that are available to us is when we go for the food, when we go for even sex, and some of us resolve or seek to resolve our depression through sex, through drugs, various kinds of means, through violence, self-inflicted violence, including suicide. We suffer silently. And so the key here is that we have to find a safe place to bleed. That is, people whom we trust, who we respect, and whom have our backs and whom care about, to let it out. Men, women, children have to have a safe place to bleed and create a safe place to bleed. Now, I don't mean simply, some quiet place with yoga mats and meditation music. I mean, just having a place where you can be yourself, where your soul can speak, and soul can speak freely without being judged, without being condemned, without being ostracized. And so that can take a number of forms. That can be among a close friend. It can be a trusted companion. It can be a partner. It can be a spouse. It can be anyone or any one of persons for whom you feel comfortable bleeding. That is, to let the soul speak. That is always an important recourse and remedy, whether you're a child or an adult, to have a safe place to bleed and among safe people which you can bleed. And that will give you that kind of protected wall, that firewall in that moment to bleed. Because by bleeding, it allows for the soul to recoup and to drain itself of the cannibalism, to drain itself of the bites and the pokes from the spirit of depression. Second thing that we can do, or third thing that we can do to deal with the onset of momentary, transitory, or long-lasting kinds of depression is indeed to make sure that we're not alone, right? Oftentimes, people contemplate, who are suffering from depression, don't realize they're suffering from depression, will contemplate suicide, will take their lives. And oftentimes, it's alone. And so when someone you hear or you whispers or you are told, or it's through a text or it's through whatever form of communication, say they feel like killing themselves, take them seriously. Because what they're doing is saying they really don't want to kill themselves, because anyone will take their lives, they will do it. They won't tell you. They'll just do it. So whenever someone says, I want to take my life, they really don't want to take their life. What it is a cry for help. They're crying for a safe place to bleed and someone for whom to bleed with, that they can feel secure, that their bleeding will be received and will not be ostracized or judged or condemned. And so Never allow yourself to be alone. You find yourself feeling the urge to be alone, reach out, find companionship, issue that proverbial cry for help. Even if it is someone that perhaps can get help for you, right? That meaning that person may not be the direct person that may offer the help, but they can get some help for you. And so rather than suffer in silence, because we all go through things, right, including yours truly, and we as human beings will always go through things, right? And so because we will always go through things, the key is to be more preventative. In fact, prevention is better than cure, because cure is the reaction to something that happens. Prevention is looking forward to the thing that's going to happen because you know it's going to happen and having something in place for it. So preventative wise, let's think more about the signs of depression, right? Inwardness, quietness, crying, uncontrollably crying for long periods of time. Those are some of the telltale signs. Wanting to be alone, wanting to not be social for a person that perhaps is normally social, wanting to just consume food and uncontrollably can't control the consumption of food. I had, one person tell me recently that, they can't help themselves. They just feel like they just want to eat, eat, and eat, and eat, and eat. That's a telltale sign that there is suffering from depression. There are other folks, who, they turn to smoking or drugs or other forms of self-destructive self-medications because, they think that that's the way to deal with the depression. In fact, it makes it worse because it creates those kinds of choices creates bigger gaps, bigger holes. And that's when the creature, the spirit of depression, has a way to devour the soul, right? And once it devours the souls, we can't come back from that. And that's when thoughts and even the trigger of suicide gets into place. But suicide is only just one form of the end result of depression. There are other forms. Many of us commit suicide daily while we're still alive. By that I mean this: we're dead inside. We're just walking around aimlessly, wondering what's our purpose. In fact, not even wondering what's our purpose, just wandering without purpose, aimlessly, having this sort of nihilistic view that life is without meaning, without purpose. And we're just trudging along, going to work, coming home, eating, going to sleep, waking up, routine. But indeed, what we're suffering from is depression, the spirit of depression, right? And not realizing it. And so if you have a loved one, people you care about, friends, family, kinfolks, and others, and you see, any of the features or signs that I'm referring to, reach out to them, right? Offer them a safe place to bleed. Offer them, if you can't do it, other kinds of people and services to help bring them back, into their equilibrium, into their stasis. Because depression is real. The spirit of depression is real. The spirit of depression is no joke. It can be momentary, transitory, come and go, or it can be what? A longer duration. And those are what? The manifestations of the spirit of depression. And so depression is a spirit that can take a hold. That hold can be for a moment, a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes. It can be transitory. It can come through for half an hour, or myself, 2 hours crying on the couch over a period of 3 weeks, or it can be for a longer duration, months, years. Either case, depression as this spirit is this malignant force, is this particular pathogen that can affect us deeply. The key is not to be alone or remain alone, to be isolated. The key is to check and examine and shore up our relationships, both in the flesh and in spirit. And the key is also to seek help, to seek counsel, to seek a safe place to bleed among anyone that you trust and value, and equally, they value you. And so these are the strategies that I've shared, and also the stories that I've shared with you. I want you to take this matter of depression as a spirit, and more than simply just anxiety or the highs and lows of our mood or mood swings. extremely seriously. As someone you know are showing signs of the symptoms that I've covered and those that I've not covered, which you're familiar with yourself, please do reach out. For Powered by Nyame, I've been your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. Please drop your comments, questions, experiences that you've had, successes you've had with depression in the comment section below. No story is too small or too big or insignificant to be shared, because something in your story may in fact help somebody else work their way through on the other side of depression, which is equilibrium, stasis, balance, and a healthier life. Thank you. Hope to see you for another episode. Till then, stay well.